Hi, everybody. It's 12:01, so I think we'll get started. I just want to welcome everybody to today's Lunch and Learn session on RAC's quarterly report, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's session. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping items to be aware of. We are recording this session. During Jonathan's presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you to unmute yourself. Also, please note that there's a very short poll at the end of this session. It will only take about 30 seconds to fill it out, and we'd appreciate any feedback you guys would be willing to provide. This just helps us with our events going forward. And with that, I will introduce Jonathan Thibault, our Senior Research Analyst here at the RAC, who's put together the presentation for today and will be leading this session. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Janet. Hey, welcome everybody. As Janet said, thanks for taking time out of your day today to join us to talk about our new quarterly report. So first I'm going to just talk a little bit about the report in general, not the specific latest issue, and kind of the types of data that are in it and the time periods that you can expect for the report to be released. And then we'll go into the latest report that covers 2021 Q4. And again, as Janet mentioned, just please feel free to jump in with any questions you have as we go. There's about 15 slides, lots of data, and I don't want you to forget your questions, so just please jump in while you can. All right, we can go to the next slide there. Thanks, Brianna. All right, so as mentioned, it's a new product. So we produce, well, actually first, sorry, I haven't met everyone that I saw on the call today. So just quickly, my name is Jonathan Thibault. I joined the RAC in September 2020. Here I do a lot of the reporting, so the annual publication of rail trends, the annual locomotive emissions monitoring report, these new quarterly reports, and as well as managing the RAC Canadian Rail Atlas on our website. So that's a little bit about me, and now we can get into the report. So the first quarterly report, it was released in November last year, and it covered 2021 Q3. And then just last week, we released the second edition, which was the 2021 Q4 report. And as you'll notice by the time period of data covered and then when it's released, there's about a 6-week lag after the close of the quarter. So you can expect the next report to come out in the first half of May, which would cover the first quarter of 2022. So the whole purpose of this report, as opposed to the annual reports, is to give you, the reader, a better sense of where the industry is at and how the economy is doing with a much shorter time lag. So instead of waiting maybe 11 months after the close of a year, here we are coming just a few weeks after the close of a quarter. So it's a lot more timely and relevant. And one thing about this report is it's kind of a launching pad to explore any data that you find relevant further. So every single table and graph throughout the whole report, it includes every single links to every single data source included in that graph. So you can, if you see something of interest, you can always easily, without spending too much time, you can dive further into those topics. The presentation today is in English, but the reports are available in both French and English on our website. So you just have to visit the resources page. It's linked on the presentation here. And I'll circle the presentation through email afterwards. There's a variety of sources. Whether it's weekly, monthly, or quarterly data, we found ways to incorporate them into this report. So some of the agencies that we're using data from include Statistics Canada, Transport Canada, Transportation Safety Board, the Bank of Canada, and Canada's Energy Regulator. And then we also have some data from the ports of Vancouver and Montreal. And then in terms of railway data, we rely on the CN&CP weekly data, and then as well as their quarterly reports. Amtrak puts out monthly performance data. And then we ask our passenger rail members for quarterly data. And that's the only source of non-public information in this report, and it's treated with confidentiality. So you'll see there's a way that we don't reveal the individual companies, but we do some analysis with that. And then for the 2020 reports, like this one's covering the fourth quarter, a lot of the data is compared back to 2020, but we also look at compared to 2019 in a lot of cases, especially on the passenger side, to get really a good measure relative to pre-pandemic activity levels, because we know 2020 and 2021 are both outliers from the past trends. And then final thing before we get into it is the presentation today is only going to cover about half of the data in the report, just in the interest of time. So There's more to the presentation. There's more to the report than in the presentation, so feel free to explore further on the website. All right, before we I'll just pause for a second before we jump into the results of the 2021 Q4 report. So if anyone has any questions, just please let me know. Okay, so Brianna will go to the next one there. Thanks. And you'll see my eyes bouncing back and forth. I have two screens, so apologies in advance for that. All right, so we start off general, looking at the Canadian economy, not specifically the rail sector, so we get context of where the economy is at. This goes back to just pre-pandemic, January 2020, and you'll see the significant dip in the spring of 2020, and then that quick rebound, and then a gradual climb since then. Good news, so as of September 2021, all of these 5 key economic indicators have recovered above 2019 levels. So we're looking at employment and GDP, which are well known and understood by the general public. And then retail sales are a good indicator from the consumer side. And then we also have manufacturing shipments, which is a good indicator from production side. And exports and imports tend to follow similar paths to manufacturing shipments, just because the majority of our trade is manufactured products and a high share of those are traded. So looking first at employment, it was really close to 2019 levels for about a year, and then just recently in August 2021, it surpassed 2019 levels, and it closed off the year in December at 2.1% above 2019 levels. GDP recovered by September, and it had small gains over October and November as well. So as of November, there's a bit of a lag in the data there, but the November GDP was sitting 1.4% above pre-pandemic levels, 2019. Retail sales are an interesting one. They've recovered really quickly after the there's a really quick rebound after the first lockdowns in spring 2020. And since June 2020, retail sales have been above 2019 levels in every single month. And the latest month reading was 13.5% above. So retail sales are going strong. Manufacturing shipments have recovered, and they're about 10% above 2019 levels today. So overall, the economy is back above where it was pre-pandemic in most senses, while there are disruptions in certain industries and certain jobs, but in general, total activity is back to where we were. Next slide. All right, so looking at, we look at both Class 1 data because there's a lot of good data available put out by CN and CP. And what we do is we combine that data to provide just a single Class 1 figure. So if you want to explore the individual companies, you could always do that in their reports and on their websites. And we do an analysis where we combine them. So the 3 things that stick out the most in 2021 were late June, early July, where we see the impacts of weekly revenue ton miles on in late June, early July due to the wildfires out west. And then again in November, there's the impacts of the flooding. And then things recovered early December, but then supply chain issues and high dwell times at ports, it really took a toll on the total activity towards the very end of the month. So so the numbers are quite low there. Notice that the axis does start at 5,000, so it's not like it's plunging to zero, but quite a significant impact on Q4. Just for total numbers, Q4 2021. Revenue ton miles were 11% below 2020 and 5% below 2019 levels. All right, next. And here we're looking at revenue ton miles again, but by commodity. So we also have this on a year-to-date basis in the report, but I just chose to focus on Q4 for today. There's also data on carloads, but we chose to look at RTMs today. RTMs in total for 2020 Q4 were 11% below 2020 levels. The one most significantly impacted sector would be grain and fertilizers, both percentage or numbers wise, biggest decline. And then the biggest increase was found in metals and minerals by 16%. But what's interesting is the carload numbers didn't really change for metals and minerals. So this would be mostly driven by longer average distances traveled for those metals and minerals. So it'd be interesting to find out more of the reasons behind that, but at this time, not too sure what's driving that. Right, next slide, please. Okay, and then we look also in the report at select key financial, operating, and safety metrics. So CN&CP's quarterly reports do similar, they have similar style graphics, so these were inspired by those. For most of these, it's a simple average between CN and CP, and then for others, it's a combination. So for things like average train weight or train length, we would just look at CN's number, CP's number, and take the simple average. But then for others like total employment, we can combine them. So there's a mix of that throughout. So I'm kind of going to go a little bit by bit to explain some of the results that we're seeing here. Freight revenue per RTM, that was actually a significant increase over 2020 Q4 of 14%. And that was mostly driven by increases in freight rates for intermodal shipments and energy, chemical, and plastics. Moving over to the right side where we have those 4 train-related metrics, those did quite well in Q4. Train weights, average train speeds both increased, and fuel efficiency increased by 1%. Going down to the bottom left, we have some FRA-related safety metrics. And you'll notice that one of them increased significantly, the accident rate for the train rate. But just for context, there's only about 15 accidents in that data set per quarter. So just a couple accidents up or down will have large percentage swings. So wouldn't read too much into that. And then looking at average cars online, we see about a 6% decrease or 8,000 car reduction compared to 2020 Q4. And this is mostly due to a reduction in covered hoppers online. There's 5,800 fewer covered hoppers online, and this kind of supports the story that we were seeing on the previous slides on grain, since a lot of that would be moved via covered hopper. So that's driving most of that decrease. And then supply chain is obviously a very big topic today, and we include terminal dwell times. They're a little bit higher in 2021 Q4. For the first 6 weeks through October and the beginning of November, they were quite similar to previous years. But then the flooding had quite an impact, and select yards in BC dwell times increased from about 10 or 20 hours to over 70 hours for a couple of weeks. Not over 70 the whole time, but quite higher than regular for a few weeks. So that really contributed to higher times, and then as well throughout December consistently, maybe related to port dwell and some other supply chain issues. Dwell continued to climb, and the average hours you see about 7.7. In the last week of December, it averaged 10.2. So towards the end of the year, it increased quite a bit. All right, next slide. All right, so that was it for the Class 1 data today. There's some overlap with what we're looking at now. So this is StatsCan's freight car loading data. Sorry for the busy slide. I wasn't sure how I wanted to present this one. And a note of the non-Class 1 data, a lot of it is going to have a lag. So you see there's no December data. And because we're never going to have the full quarter's data within 6 weeks of the close of the quarter, and we don't want to wait too long till the data is less relevant, we put it out and we explain it on a year-to-date basis. So we show monthly data on the left here, and then on the right, we're doing a January to November year-to-date. So that's just how that data and some other data is analyzed throughout the report. So in terms of non-intermodal carloads, so StatsCan has an analysis where it's quite separate. You can analyze the carloads for non-intermodal and then the units for intermodal. Non-intermodal carloads were 4% below 2020 on a year-to-date basis and 9% below 2019. The monthly car loadings since May have been quite a bit lower, consistently lower than previous years. So the first few months were relatively average or strong, and then it got a little bit weaker. And then looking on the right side, we show the year-to-date by category. So StatsCan has over 60 categories of commodities, and we lump them into 10 plus intermodal. So you'll see 11 different ones on the right there. And then compared to 2020, we see about half of them are up between 2 to 5%, but then a handful of them are down. It's quite a variation across. And then looking down at the bottom left, we have intermodal units. So since the onset of the pandemic, we know there's been a lot of factors impacting intermodal shipments, including container shortages. So we see on a year-to-date basis, 2021 2021 is being better than 2020. We're up 15% from 2020, and we're at the same level as 2019. But if you look by month, we see that the first few months were quite good. And then just in the last couple months of the year, October, November, we start to see a decline, the red bars in that bottom graph. And I don't think the December number is going to look too strong. So just because of all the port dwell times and things like that. So intermodal, I guess the whole trend of the year was the last few months have been a bit challenging, and it's kind of affecting the overall annual numbers. Okay, next slide. So freight rates. So comparing rail freight rates, we can compare them to trucking price indices for higher trucking. And then I like to consider it in the context of other price indices. So consumer price index is well known by the general public, so that's included in this analysis. And then railroads are carrying industrial products, they're carrying commodities. So we have industrial and commodity price indices to see, if the product's prices are rising more than the freight rates and just all the relationships there. So in this graph, we also provide data back to 2009 to understand the volatility of these indices before the pandemic. And we know that most of them are relatively stable, except for commodity prices. So big swings are expected in commodity prices relative to the other ones. Freight rates for rail didn't, according to StatsCan sources, didn't really increase for the first 18 months of the pandemic, or at least through until about July 2021. It was around the same level as January 2020, and then it slowly increased steadily over the last few months, and they're about 7% higher than they were in the past. Looking at trucking, it's been a 2.5% increase, but their data is only recent up to September, and in September, rail was at 3.1% higher. So it'll be interesting to see over the October, November, December months if trucking follows the same path as rail or not. Consumer prices have followed quite a similar path. They're at 5.3% above their January 2020 level. I think there's actually extra gains in January for the CPI, so it'll be a bit higher now. And then industrial and commodity prices have risen a lot faster than rail. So commodity prices, knowing that they're quite volatile, using that January 2020 baseline, they're 52% higher than they were then, and industrial prices are up almost 19%. Okay, next. So I mentioned that we were talking about some of the port dwell times. We'll look first at Vancouver. In the first 7 months of the year, dwell times were a little bit longer than they were last year. And maybe you've noticed throughout this report, I try to use red for 2021, so that's the data we're looking at, and then blue for 2020, gray for 2019. So there's a consistency there. So hopefully it's easy to maintain understanding as we go across all these graphs really quickly. And then in the last few months, it was getting better until December. So December, it really skyrocketed up to 8.1 days of dwell time at Port of Vancouver for rail. And in January 2022, the data has come out recently, and it's at 7.5 hours. So it's still quite high, more than double the previous 2 Januaries. So dwell times at the Port of Vancouver are still focused. Looking over to Montreal, there's quite variation across months, but 2021 as a whole had the same average dwell times as 2020 at 4.6 days. But these are higher than 2018, which averaged 3.6 days, and 2019, which averaged 3.1 days. And then also not shown here, January 2022, we have 4.7 days as an average. So that would be a little bit higher than it was last month and a little bit higher than the previous January. So port dwell times are things that we're going to keep our eye on. All right, next. So now we'll be switching to the passenger side. So there's a little bit less data overall on passenger rail, and the amount of the report dedicated to passengers is going to be a little bit shorter than freight. But we do have some good data from public sources, and then also this slide right here is the one source of member information that we've included. So this is a mix of Intercity, commuter, and tourism rail members that report on a quarterly basis to the RAC, their ridership, and they provided 2019 data, 2020 and 2021, so we can really analyze what's happening compared to pre-pandemic periods. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic had significant impacts on ridership. Looking at the quarter 4, 7 out of the 8 members that provided information reported lower ridership levels than they did in Q4 2019. And the median ridership was down 58%. And then looking at the full year, all 8 members actually had lower ridership than they did in 2019 as a whole, and the median ridership was down 73%. So the next few slides will paint a bit more of an optimistic picture, but we do know that 2021 had a very significant impact relative to pre-pandemic levels. Next slide. So there isn't too much data on commuter rail ridership, at least on a monthly or quarterly basis. So we rely on the urban transit system ridership data from Statistics Canada, and commuter rail would be a component of this information, but this would also include other things like bus and streetcars. We see a little bit of a recovery in April to July 2020, but then things were quite stale for about a year, and ridership didn't, it was really hovering around 65% below 2019 levels. Fortunately, in July 2021, we started to see a bit of a recovery, and we saw gains each month. And in November, we were at 46% below 2019 levels. So ridership had climbed to greater than half of its pre-pandemic level. And this was the case in all regions. You see Quebec and Ontario, the most affected, reached 49% below 2019 levels. And then Atlantic Canada, the least impacted, but still significantly 29% below 2019 levels. Right, next. So speaking a bit to the data constraints when it comes to passenger rail, there's a lag, considerable lag in tourism expenditure data. So this is Q3, and it's included in the Q4 report. So here we're comparing the latest quarter of tourism expenditures against the third quarter of 2019, and then also looking at how Q3 2020 did versus the pre-pandemic baseline as well. So passenger rail, fourth from the left there, Q3 expenditures on passenger rail was 63% below pre-pandemic levels, but this is better than it was in 2020, because in 2020 Q3 we were 82% below 2019 Q3 levels. So you'll see the red bars are less negative than the blue bars, which means 2021 Q3 is doing a bit better than 2020 Q3, and total tourism expenditures are down 39%, whereas they're down 56% in Q3 2020. So there's a bit of a recovery happening, but we're still got a long way to go in tourism. All right, next. Thanks. So on intercity passenger rail, we have data for both VIA and Amtrak, and these are both publicly available data sources. So VIA has really increased ridership in the last few months. So starting, I mean, even since April, we've seen quite consistent gains, and we're actually achieving over half of 2019 levels, the gray bar there. So really strong growth over the last few months, much better than 2020. On a year-to-date basis, VIA Rail ridership was 4% above 2020. So although it's doing really well now, you can see in the first few months before the pandemic kicked in, 2020 enjoyed some okay numbers, whereas 2021 didn't benefit from that. But overall, on a year basis, we've actually 2021's beat 2020 so far, and I'm assuming November and December will do the same. But we're still 74% below 2019 levels. So looks like we're climbing to about half the level of 2019, and we'll see what happens in the near future. And then the path for Amtrak has been quite similar. So Amtrak has many routes, and we're considering the 3 routes that have a Canadian component. So there's Cascades in BC, Adirondack that comes up to Quebec, and then Maple Leaf, which comes into Ontario. And the ridership here doesn't specify the exact trip taken. So it could be domestic trips, it could be cross-border trips. So we just have data on the number of riders in total. And Amtrak's 2021 ridership was 53% above 2020, but it's still 59% below 2019. So a little bit less adversely affected than the VIA numbers, but still a similar trend. All right, next slide, please. And I realize I went much quicker through this than expected. So this is actually the last slide. So after this one, I'm really happy to take the half hour to go back and discuss any of these items further. So this here is the TSB data, the monthly data compiled into quarters on federally regulated railways. We see overall, these are the indicators that I think paint a good picture of rail safety. We have total accidents and accident rates. And then 3 key interest categories of interest: main track derailments, crossing trespassing, and dangerous goods. So 2021 Q4 overall looked pretty good. Both the number of accidents and the accident rates were better than they were last year and better than the previous 5-year average. And then looking at key accident categories, the main track derailments were the same as the previous 5-year average. It's percentage-wise quite a bit higher than 2020, but I mean, that's only 4 accidents. So it's such a small number of accidents in that category that percentage changes can be high. Crossing and trespassing, better than previous years. And accidents involving dangerous goods, significant improvement from the 5-year average. And although it's higher than 2020, 2020 was quite a unique year with very low number of dangerous goods accidents. So over the past decade, the number of accidents involving dangerous goods ranged between 101 and 171, except for 2020 only had 82. So comparing against a 5-year baseline, allows us to compare ourselves against more of an average rather than an outlier year. So that's why both are done here. All right, so that's the data that I wanted to present today, and happy to have a discussion now about anything you saw, anything you'd like to see in future reports, any thoughts that you have, or anything that we may have missed.
Thanks, Jonathan. Maybe I'll ask a question to start on the port slide, where you showed the idling at the Port of Vancouver and idling at the Port of Montreal. If you go back, the Vancouver data is kind of self-explanatory based on sort of what happened at the end of last year. But in the Montreal port, August looked like it was, here it is, Montreal terminal dwell in August is higher. Is there an explanation for that? I'm just curious. Like, do you receive sort of the reasons why when you're putting this together?
That's a good question, Janet. And I'm sure someone on this call knows, and I apologize. There's so many data points in this report that I don't fully investigate each one, but that is one that definitely I'm sure has a reason, and I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but if someone does, that would be great to hear.
And Jonathan, of all the data points, is there any one in particular that was surprised you the most?
So now I got to think back across the whole. Well, one thing about it is it's really, it's hard to, like, in normal times, big changes would jump out to me, but as we're comparing to 2019 and then 2020, it's hard to really know what the most significant changes were, because sometimes you see a huge change and then you think that there's something happening, and then you realize that it was actually 2020 that was the outlier, and then when we're comparing against that, that's where most of that change. The 2020 was the outlier, not 2021, maybe in that point. So there is a lot. We're seeing significant percentage changes when we're drilling down into different categories and different time periods, just because so much is happening. But it was quite interesting to see, the dwell times, how they really just they go up, they go down, and it's been a few years now where things are just they're not very consistent, right? So problems happen and then they're dealt with quite quickly, and then back to normal, and then something else comes down the line. So
Jonathan,
hey,
Caroline speaking.
Go ahead, Caroline.
I'm just, I think to get back to the dwell time at the Port of Montreal, I think the dwell time that we see that happened in the August 2020 is directly related to the labor strike at the time. So I think that's linked. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline.
Great job, Jonathan. It's Mitch here. Just a question. The first couple slides for you, the class ones, some of their financial metrics there and operating ratios. Is that specific to like just the Canadian side of those operations, or is that the CN and CP's entire networks? I know that when they report their financials, it's across the network. So just wondering if that's Canada specific.
No, yeah, that's a great question. Those are the network-wide figures. So I forgot to mention, all the Class 1 data in this report is their network-wide data, and then the freight data that follows the Class 1 data is Canadian specific. So we go from Class 1 network-wide to Canadian, including all railways, Canadian specific. So that's why there's definitely like when we're looking at a similar number. So let's say we were looking at minerals shipments, we'll see a different pattern between the Canadian all railway data and then the Class 1 network-wide data. So yeah, all those are from their quarterly reports and their weekly information, and yeah, as you mentioned, network-wide. So.
Perfect. Thanks, John.
Any other questions for Jonathan? This is your chance to put him on the spot. Come on, people. No? Okay, well, maybe we'll pull up the poll. And as Jonathan mentioned, we'll make sure that we circulate the deck to everybody after this session, and we will be posting this on RAC's YouTube channel. So feel free to go back and check in on our YouTube channel if there's anything that you need to refer back to or anything like that. And yeah, I just want to say again, thank you all so much for taking the time. If there are any questions that you had but didn't feel comfortable bringing up during this forum, please feel free to reach out to Jonathan. I know that he's always willing and able to answer all of your questions about data. And so thank you again. And thank you, Mitch, for the nice comments in the chat. And yeah, I guess that's it for today's session. I think this will be a continual lunch and learn session throughout the years. We may not do every quarter, maybe every second quarter, but stay tuned for future invites to this as well. And everybody have a great day. Oh,
thanks,
sorry.
everyone.
Oh, Jonathan, there's a question through the chat that just says, going forward, would it be possible to include KPI for short lines as well?
So I think it might be quite challenging to gather data from our short lines on a quarterly basis, just because yeah, just the size of their operations and the personnel to provide reporting every quarter. And then I'm wondering if there might be a concern that we might get different members responding for different quarters, and then there might not be a very consistent trend depending on who reports. But so I didn't get a chance to see who asked that question. I'd be happy to meet afterwards and talk more about the potential.
Yeah, so it was Anne, and oh, there she is. And did you want to unmute maybe? There you go.
Yep.
Thanks.
So, yes, it was super interesting, and I agree. Maybe it will be difficult because maybe it will be a bit inconsistent. But once in a year or twice a year, if we can have something that we can compare our performance against other short line, that will be interesting for me to get a bit more data on that.
That'd be great. I was definitely interested in getting more short line information, and that was some of the initial feedback we received. And I know TC was trying to put together a quarterly short line survey, but they weren't getting enough responses to do to work with it. But I'm sure we can have better luck. And so yeah, I'd love to think about it, and I'll follow up with you afterwards, and we can maybe think about the types of data or information that would be useful for the members.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, everybody have a great day. Good rest of the week. We're home stretch for Friday, so enjoy, and thank you again for attending.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Janet.
Thanks, Jonathan.